Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply, and this video is to bring you a closer look at this is the Rixson number M190. This is an intermediate pivot. This is a slightly less common because of that 1.5. That's an 1.5" offset intermediate pivot. Only less common just because 1.5" offset is simply less common. This is in the oil rubbed bronze finish. And this video is going to serve as a visual review, a review over the ever-evolving oil rub bronze. It's awfully dark to me. I'm going to stop short in saying that it's black because under the reflection of a certain light, it will have a difficult to detect bronze tone to it. You know, the issue with oil rub bronze, and I'm not an oil rub bronze apologist. It's a finish that's subject to interpretation in the sense of change. It is an unstable finish. It is manufactured by lots of people that all have a different process by which they do it, and it turns out differently every single time. Understand, when you order oil rub bronze finish, manufacturer A, manufacturer B, C, none of it's going to be exactly the same. One hallmark of the old days, the late 19th century, the second half of the 19th century, you would be able to buy all of your hardware from a single manufacturer. And what was nice about that, I imagine, is that their finishes probably matched pretty well across the board. This order on it has hinges from McKinney in oil rub, don't match this. Pivots from Rixson in oil rubbed, don't match that. Roller latches from DCI in oil rubbed, none of it matches. And it's because they're all different. That's all there is to it. If you want a consistent finish on your hardware, order something that is by definition consistent. Oil rubbed bronze, or 613 or 640 for that matter. They're both oil rubbed bronze. 613 means on a bronze based material. 640 means on a steel-based material. The definition of either of those is inconsistent. So I suppose just be mindful of that. And we'll move on. Every time I look at a pivot, oil-rubbed piece of hardware, I know in my head what oil-rubbed is supposed to look like. It is supposed to have a bronze-based material. It is supposed to be an oil-rubbed, hand-rubbed process that will be oily to the touch. When it's fresh, it will leave blackened marks on your hand, and with time, that oil rubbing is going to wear off, wear away, where constant contact is on the hardware, revealing that gold, bronze, gorgeous, rich base material through. And that's just not what people necessarily want. The minority of people literally want a finish that's going to wear off. Occasionally some do. I did a country club full of hardware here in southern Florida, and we had the discussion. Everything was oil rubbed, and we had the discussion. Listen, there are two ways to go about this. True oil rubbed, and nothing's going to match each other. Or we can do a powder coated dark bronze equivalent, which they call US 10BE, US 10B, oil rubbed, E for equivalent. It's powder coated. The thing is, everything will match. And they opted for the latter. They wanted everything to match. And that's it. And I can't blame that at all. You know, the handles are powder coated, a very durable process by which to create your hardware. You know, and if this order has 4 pivots on it, and, you know, it's very likely that they're all going to be different. You know, it's the nature of the beast. That's what you're going to see when you're on the pull side of the door. That's a large intermediate pivot, and we're going to dissect why it's so large, and we'll go over the dimensional properties. First, the rest of the material in the packaging is just wood screws and machine screws. So you'll have enough screws to do wood or machine applications. Your template and installation instructions are also in the box. And we are going to start with a dimensional review of the item with the template. So if you'd kindly open the document below this video that says template, we're going to take a look at that and throw some dimensions, the tape measure, on this piece of equipment to make sure it matches. Just starting with a quick overview of the dimensional properties of this pivot. Looking at the template, Rixson simultaneously frightens and deeply benefits people with the quantity of dimensions that are on their drawings. You know, if you're mortising for a wood door and frame, you don't need to know necessarily where all those screw holes are. If you are a hollow metal manufacturer, you absolutely need to know where all that stuff is. So sometimes it's a lot to look at, and other times it's exactly what you need. I have never found a Rixson template to be off at all, and in fact, if I was going to machine one of these in a wood door primarily, and I wasn't finding the dimension that I needed, I knew to just hang in there and continue to study the document, because knowing Rixson, it's definitely in the paperwork. Everything is there that you need, absolutely. And quite frankly, I can't really say that there's ever anything more than what you need. So anyway, briefly touching on the dimensional properties of the item. They do show an overall height of the hardware, just holding it backwards, of 5 inch. Yeah, that's indeed the case. The overall width of the door leaf and the frame leaf, those are indeed the same, 1.1 inches. Okay. Now what I have found is that if you are matching, if you're trying to match a pivot in the field, a lot of people's intermediate pivots that are 1.5 inch offset are going to look like this. Go to the template. You check those screw hole locations and the overall size, and that's how you'll positively identify whose template you're dealing with. People will send me photographs of an unknown pivot. If it's aluminum storefront, it very likely could be Ives. I see Ives a lot in aluminum storefront, but you could also see Rixson. However, if it's epically large wood doors, I'm thinking Rixson immediately. If it's a floor closer, I'm definitely thinking Rixson immediately, because that floor closer is going to be Rixson. You know, a lot of other people make this pivot hardware, Dorma and ABH, obviously, and certainly, and many boutique manufacturers as well. But Rixson, you're going to find out there all the time. But the way to determine that is going to be to know those locations for the screw holes, and that's where that comes in handy. Looking at the template in the upper area, you know what, let's just switch to the template view. So we've got the template view pulled up here, and looking up here, you know, they're really referring to they are referring to and what I've been staring at is that 1/2 inch clearance holes in door and frame. The installation instructions don't call that out. That's drawn 07 of 09, 10 of 10. The only thing I can think of is that might be a reference and not belong on here to when you are doing a electrified pivot. That would make sense that you would have a 1/2 inch clearance for that. Yeah, they're showing that same sort of reference. They show it here and here as well, and not here. I'm thinking that that is just I just finished saying that I've never seen anything on a template that doesn't belong there. But in this case, it doesn't belong there. This is not an electrified pivot. So you have all of these dimensional properties, and that will help you definitely lay out what you're working on. There are two notes here that are, there are three notes here that are actually important. 1.5 inches, and we're going to talk about that. That is the center line of the vertical axis of pivoting measured from the face of the door. Okay. The second is this 3/16 chamfer that they want on this edge of the door, and that you need to have 1/8 of an inch between the push face of the door and the stop and the face of the stop. That's number 2. Number 3, they want a beveled edge door here. You know, to relieve the possibility that you're going to be hinge bound, or in this case pivot bound. You know, best practice would be to put a bevel on here. 1/8 and 2. 1/8 and 2, what does that mean? Let's talk about what that means now. Actually, I have a very elegant way to show you what that means. Start by defining what that means as the following. You have a door that's beveled, and of course that bevel is, you know, very much exaggerated, and you have your thickness, typically 1 3/4 inch thick. Okay. The distance from here over, okay, is based on the formula 1/8 in 2. If I draw this line straight down, the x dimension is the formula. This is 1/8 of an inch for every 2 inch in door thickness. Okay, that's 1/8 and 2. So obviously this dimension is going to be slightly smaller than 1/8 of an inch when we're dealing with 1 3/4 inch thick door. A more elegant way to show it, and that would be from a Yale and Town catalog from 1884 that defines bevel for us. And this is a great drawing. This really accurately shows, and even though the formula is different, their bevel was heavier 130 years ago, 140 years ago. It does very nicely illustrate what we're talking about, 1/8 and 2. Okay, this formula was 1/4 and 2 1/4. That's a pretty heavy bevel. Definitely not necessary to be that heavy. 2 1/4 doors must have been very common if they're going to use that in their catalog to define that. If you're interested to see that catalog and more of the 400 pages of it, anywhere from within our website, get to the manufacturer's page, Control F, Yale, search basically, Yale, and then you'll come up with all these archival catalogs that we have here. Very interesting. Okay, and it's a sister company of Rixson. So that's the third thing that's important on the template page. All right. Now let's move into the installation instructions. So looking at the template, let's talk about this 1.5 inch dimension. And that will get us looking at also the catalog that is also here, because in the front of the catalog they ought to define, yeah, they don't. They do in the, well, they do. 1.5 inch offset. Offset is the distance from the face of the door to the pivot point, what I call the vertical axis of pivoting. Extended offsets should not be used unless there is cladding on the face of the door or there is trim to clear on the frame. 1.5 inch offset arms and pivots are for doors with cladding or trim that project 3/4 inch from the face of the door. The greater the offset, the less weight can be carried by the pivot. So what they're really talking about there is you have a frame, okay, and you have your offset pivot. Okay, you've got your door. So what they're saying is that center line to the face of the door. Okay, that's 1.5 inch on this pivot. It is normally 3/4 inch. That's the standard pivot. So when they're saying to us that offset arms and pivots are for doors with cladding or trim that project 3/4 inch from the face of the door. Okay, well, 3/4 inch plus 3/4 inch, that's going to be your 1.5 inches. So if you need the greater offset, you'd be in good shape. Meaning, you've got something happening, they're saying cladding on the door, something that builds out like this. You've applied something, let's say, to go with some sort of woodwork trim that's on the wall. That could be the case. There would be no reason to use 1.5 inch offset unless there was a specific reason to use it, such as the cladding, as we had just spoken about. I did a steel door for someone, a 14 gauge steel door, and they wanted to have their cedar glued and screwed to the face of the door. So we ordered a very heavy gauge door for the client and then drilled 100 or more holes through all of this. The client then drilled and tapped. Well, he didn't tap. He just used stainless sheet metal screws. So what he actually did was he really turned the thickness of his door from 1.75 inches to 2.5, because he took one by material and then put it on top of his door, that redwood. Now, that's not inherently a problem on its own, but if you have a wall condition that would restrict that door opening properly, then you need to kick the dimension, the vertical axis of pivoting, off the face of the door even more. Another reason why you might just need 1.5 inches is because in our same frame scenario, you've got your pivot, okay? Say you have a partition wall, okay? Probably no reason at all to have anything greater than 3/4 inch. And in fact, it might be nice if it was as small as possible, because you really want the vertical axis of pivoting as close to the face of the door as you can, because as they say here, the greater the offset, the less weight can be carried by the pivot. Well, that stands true for hinges as well. Well, what if you were doing an application with 8-inch block and a 5 3/4 frame, and you ran a T-anchor, okay, and your client said, you know what, we're going to go with a standard 5 3/4 frame, but what I need to be able to do here's my wall construction. I need to be able to take my door and swing it out so that it now is going to be like this. So that dimension now, what we're offsetting it from the face of the door to the vertical axis of pivoting, could also be because I need to clear this unusual circumstance. So whatever reason you're offsetting it, there will be a reason that you're offsetting it. The question is, whatever the point is whatever the reason is that you're going to offset the pivot, is going to be because you need to clear something, okay? And that's just where that stands. And that's this defined. The standard pivot is 3/4 inch. Now, as we slide back to the template, after talking about why that dimension is important, use it accordingly. You're only going to use 1.5 inch offset when you need to. So let's click over to the installation instructions. All of page 1, with the exception of that 1/2 inch reference, will be identical. And now when we move to page 2, once upon a time, this sheet never existed. There were no installation instructions. This was your installation instruction. And really what you needed to know is, okay, What you needed to know was this: 1/4 inch. That's it. You have that, everything else is going to fall in place when you make sure that you observe this. Okay? And that you are observing this. Page 2 of the installation instructions, as far as I'm concerned, may have been a response to, I'm just guessing here, Ives has a very simple method of installation where they have literally a page that looks like this. It's not a lot to it. Obviously what's crucial, the most crucial thing is that you have a plumb installation. Absolutely plumb. Okay? It is so important that they offer a tool for this. That tool is in our site somewhere. I just don't recall what the name of it is. And at long last I have found it. There are 2 of them, these pivot closer alignment tools. There's the 2604 and the 2608. The 2604 is probably the one that you'll need because the 08 is used for the extended top pivots. So the Rixson 2604 is used accordingly. Great tool to be able to help you strike that plumb line. That's absolutely mandatory. You need to provide the plumb bob and the nylon string naturally. So that's a great tool because this is what's absolutely most crucial. Okay. Also, what's crucial is that the wood door, if it is a wood door, everything be reinforced properly. I've had people install pivots, and they've ended up cutting the door down so severely that it's being attached to basically particle board. So as we look at the installation instructions, obviously all the things that you're going to need here, but these installation instructions are really for a complete set of pivot hardware. And, we're looking at only the intermediate pivot. So generally what's going to be done is someone will mortise the top of the door and the header really, for the 180 1.5-inch pivot, drop that plumb bob down, strike where you're going to have your vertical axis of pivoting on your bottom pivot. And then when you mortise your intermediate pivot, according to the template, it should line up perfectly. And that's all there is to it. Templating, machining for this is a very simple proposition from the door supplier, because you're basically just going to create in the door leaf this rectangle. You're going to obviously have to create this notch all the way through the door, okay, for it to be able to, exit accordingly. Admittedly, it's handy to have the hardware in your hand, and we are looking at a right-hand version here. So when you prep this rectangle, all of this gets opened up, but so does this area all the way through the door. Okay, not very clear on the template that that's what you're doing, but there's no other way to make this pivot work when you look at, frankly, the dimensional properties of the item. And it is true to say that while it may not be completely obvious, when you mortise your door leaf for this 1.125 wide portion at this reverse 1/4-inch backset, if I can call it that, there's no way to be able to just leave that shy 1/4 inch here and not chisel through the face of the door for this portion here, this height, which they are very importantly giving us as 1 15/16 of an inch. It is not necessary to have the hardware when you're mortising for this material, but from the perspective of someone, myself, who has mortised for every piece of equipment really possible, it's very handy to have the part there because it allows you to do a reality check, especially when it's the first time that you're doing it. And if you've done it multiple times, then yeah, the template's going to be adequate. But it is handy to, not required, but it's nice to have the hardware. It's nice to have the hardware because you can guarantee the fit as well. and ensure that it's going to go to the job site and actually fit and work the way it's supposed to. So that mortise is going to be up here too. It's this rectangle, but it's this notch that you'll do through the face of the door for that extra 1/4 inch, that 1 15/16 height. Now, as we get back to the installation instructions on this, again, it's for the entire gizmo. You're going to strike your, like I said earlier, top header pivot will go in, strike a line, and then machine the intermediate accordingly, and I think you'll be in real good shape. There's also a link to the product catalog here, which is a really nice reference guide to all things Rixson pivot related. You want to see the M190, just Control F for M190 and you'll be able to get to it. Why is the M190 important and why is it used? Well, the reason that it's used is, in my opinion, the reason that I like to use it is when you are doing a job that's going to require, bear with me, I want to make this point. The M19, your standard pivot, not load bearing. Okay, this is not intended to handle any sort of weight. Well, it's not load bearing. You get into the M190, that's where you're going to have load bearing. So I'll use, and people will use M190s where? Well, when you want to carry some weight. But when you have an installation like an arch top, a radius top door, an arch top door, where you don't have a top pivot. So you're going to use load-bearing M190s in that sort of installation to properly hang the door. Okay. Heavy-duty full mortise, these are definitely handed. There is no way to reverse them because the plates are literally different. And how they assemble the pieces together are different as well. Looking at the hardware, you have handed plates, so they do have to be ordered as handed. When no top pivot is possible, lateral load bearing maintains door alignment. Absolutely. A minute on maintains door alignment. That's going to really mean that you're dealing with a scenario that when people use pivots, they very often are thinking they want to use a piece of hardware on their door. When someone says, I want pivots, what they're really saying is, I want hardware that I can't see sometimes. So what they're going to want to use is a center hung pivot, where that vertical axis of pivoting is right through the center of the thickness of the door. Okay? The problem with center hung pivots is you're pivoting it up here and down here, and there's nothing in the middle. So if you have a scenario by which you hang your door on center hung pivots where there is no function of an intermediate pivot, and you have any warp at all in your door, you can count on the door manufacturer not giving you a warranty because you've not what they call properly hung the door. And that's where maintaining door alignment is required, but only possible in offset pivots, either 3/4 or 1.5 inches. So if you want a door to be properly hung, it would need to have an intermediate pivot, but there's a definition for that. For doors up to 60 inch, 2 hinges or pivots are okay. For every 30 inch, after 60, you're going to add a third pivot, intermediate pivot, or hinge. For every 30 inch thereafter, you're going to add an additional one. So from 60 to 90 inch, you've got 3. So doors up to 60 inch, but not including 60, will have 2. 60 to 90 will have 3. Over 90 and up to 120, you'll have 4. Pardon me. Yeah, that's right. You'll have 4. So you need that intermediate pivot to help maintain that door alignment. aids in installing floor closers and bottom pivots. I would think so, because it's going to help keep your door in alignment. Trying to get a door closer to work on a warped door is going to be a challenge, because your door, we could certainly imagine, is not going to be sitting on your hardware very straight. Heavy duty needle bearing, when you look down into the hardware itself, and we'll inspect it before we wrap this video up, you're definitely going to see that. 3/4 inch offset is standard, but we're doing 1.5 inches. Actually, I should probably see where they're referring to the 1.5 inch version. Which I don't see it immediately. Non-ferrous base material. Yeah, this is going to be brass, or it's going to be stainless. And this is the definition of where I just talked about the quantity, furnished with wood and machine screws. There's your optional feature. There's not a separate page. I just missed it. 1.5 inch offset. They can do these up to 20-minute rated as well. Be sure to specify that FM190. I don't know that they'll do electric transfer in 1.5 inch offset. They will. You can do an EM19. That's inherently going to be a non-load-bearing hinge when you need to pass wires through it. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 wire, most likely. If you want to do monitoring on the door, switches, request to exit, annunciators, anything that you can imagine that's electrified, this would be available in a through-wire model as well. Okay, so really handy document that's here that you can review all of the pivots. And if you deal with pivots relatively often, I would recommend that you review and read the general information area. What pivots are used for? And I won't go over it here, but it's all here. And this was the part earlier that we were demonstrating. 3/4 inch offset, 1.5 inch offset, and then your center hung. Okay, really pivot hardware 101 type information that should be reviewed, etc. Let's wrap up this video. And here is that needle bearing that we were talking about. This is going to be the door leaf that will sit, the female portion will sit on the male portion. Obviously, that's going to carry the load. That's that needle bearing that's in there. And that's what makes these handed. This is put together this way. In this piece, this is handed through and through. There is no way to reverse these parts. They are literally made as handed units. From your perspective, you are pushing on the door, and it will swing out to the left. I'm on the outside. From my perspective, it's a right-hand reverse. Okay. Now, there is a link below this video to the manufacturer's page where you can pull up not only all of the Rixson products that we sell, but a link to the manufacturer's website, as well as a link to the current full product catalog. Rixson is a part of Assa Abloy, and they have sister companies such as Corbin Russwin, Yale, Sargent, Rockwood, McKinney, Pemco, Adams Wright, Hess, I think Folger Adam, I'm sure Folger Adam, goes on and on and on. The point is that they are a part of this huge umbrella of a company, a company that I saw a marketing release that they basically said, listen, if you want something custom, get a piece of paper and sketch it to us and send it to us and we'll quote it. And we've done work with Rixson where we've done pivot hardware that will handle a 3,000-pound door. They have lots of applications in their library of problem solving that, frankly, no one else has. As I said earlier, a lot of other people make pivots and a lot of people make what Rixson make. But there are certain things that only Rixson makes. How often will you hang a 3,000-pound door? Not often. But should you ever need to, there's one company that you'll go to. Now that link to the manufacturer's page will allow you to review not only the current catalog, which is obviously a walk through all things Rixson. And they obviously make a lot more than pivots. And realistically, if you think of Rixson, you might think of them only as floor closers or maybe overhead stops. I think of them probably first and foremost as probably pivots, but then floor closers as well, A lot of other people make floor closers, but not everybody makes floor closers that can do what Rixson floor closers can. On that manufacturer's page, in addition to the current catalog, there'll be some older catalogs. There also happens to be one that's there that's 100 years old. When it comes to Rixson material, it's nice to be able to look back in time and see this old stuff that existed once upon a time. And it is on that page where we will leave encyclopedic archival documentation for your use as well. When it comes to Rixson floor closers, we also have a ability to repair yours. Our record, I believe, is a Rixson floor closer from definitely pre-World War I that we were able to, 100 plus years of useful service for this client. He called and said, can you repair it? Sure, we can repair it. Send us photographs. Yes, we can repair it. And he'll get another 100 years out of it. Is just another service that we do on Rixson floor closers. You can also rely on their technical support department. Couple of individuals there. There was an individual there in particular in the past who's no longer with them. But that lineage lives on with their ability to be able to draw on that huge library of applications that they have that I'd kind of mentioned earlier. Any questions on the M190 intermediate load-bearing pivot 1.5" offset in a 613 finish or any other Rixson product, please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you.